Thank you. Thank you for the invite. I'm sorry I couldn't be in Canada today with you, but it is still great to talk to you and to meet you online. So yes, my name is Anna Trisovic, and I'm going to talk about evidence-based practices for better research software. I work with the Department of Biostatistics at Harvard and also at the Institute for Quantitative Social Science at Harvard. So, okay. This is going to be the agenda for the presentation today. So first, I'm going to talk about the challenge. So why do we want to keep research software better? So what is challenging about it? Then I'm going to talk about the large-scale study that I've conducted on code quality and execution. So thank you for mentioning that one. And then I'm going to talk about results of this experiment and also discussion, what we learned from it. And after that, I'm going to talk about what researchers can do to improve their software and code, and also what research labs can do to kind of encourage better software development. All right, so first we talk about the challenge. So what is challenging about software? About research software. So in academia, in many cases, we have students and early career researchers who write research software code. And typically, they are new to programming, which means that they essentially need to learn on the fly and create this software in order to conduct an analysis or conduct some simulation or experiment. So that then kind of creates software that is not optimal. Then practices such as code review, testing, and other advanced practices are rarely implemented. So oftentimes there's going to be no code review, no testing, no code testing, and other practices such as continuous integration will not be implemented, meaning that this software is then going to be hard to reuse. And that is maybe one of the also big differences from the industry software. Next thing is that the lifetime of research code is typically short, meaning that there is also no incentive to have this code be clean, to keep this code clean and also maintained. So in particular, what do I mean with that? The lifetime of research code is short. So typically in academia and in our research groups, in my research group at the Department of Biostatistics, everything revolves around publishing papers. So we have a group of researchers, these are here, us researchers, we want to write papers and we also want to then publish them in journals. However, in this doing this, we will create some research data and research code. Or we'll use some research data and develop some research code. However, once the paper is published, the lifetime of this code is going to be finished, right? We are not going to reuse this code typically because the results are already published. So why? So that means that the lifetime of this research code is short. Is that once we have a publication, we are not going to come back to this research code. But then what still happens is that journals are going to require that this code be public so that other people can verify our results and also for reproducibility and transparency purposes. So then what happens is that we publish our research code in software research repositories. So that looks something like this. From this research paper or research study, we will have research data and code that then is passed to a data repository, a research data repository, and then anyone potentially can access our code. And next, I'm going to talk about a large-scale study on this kind of research data and code from a data repository. And in particular, I've done this experiment, so the large-scale study on research data and code on the data repository called Dataverse. So that's the Dataverse, kind of like the universe of data, right? So what is Dataverse. It's a free and open source software platform to archive, share, and cite research data. The Dataverse project provides data repository software that can be installed at institutions, and typically, so today there are, I think, around 90 institutions worldwide that deploy the Dataverse software and have these Dataverse data repository installations. All right, so for these around 90 installations around the world, they serve researchers at each of these institutions, and sometimes even like national researchers. So for example, that's like in Norway and in the Netherlands, the Dataverse installations are for the whole country. So researchers from the whole country will deposit their research data and code to these repositories. And in particular, these bundles of research data and code that we've seen are typically called, in our Dataverse lingo, they're called replication datasets. So these are a bundle of data, code, and other files needed to reproduce a published study and also to make it transparent and verifiable online. So how does that look on a Dataverse repository? It looks something like this. So in particular, at the Harvard Dataverse installation, many of the journals that collaborate with Harvard Dataverse will have their own collections. So here we can see a collection by the American Journal of Political Science, which then gathers data and code published in their journal. And here on the right-hand side, you can see a replication data for a paper. So this is how it looks like. One can copy this information in order to cite this data set. There is also a description, keywords about the data set itself. And we can see a list of files that is available in this data set. So that's going to be some PDF files, and we can see our files. All right. So the idea of the large-scale study, of the large-scale experiment on this data and code that I've conducted was to understand how reusable these replication data sets are. Can we really replicate the findings, and can we actually even run the code? So it is kind of like equivalent of like what would happen if we press download here for all of these files and just try to run the code. So that's the equivalent idea of the large-scale study. So the large-scale study was done on the AWS cloud. So, and this is how the study workflow went. So first, replication datasets, or a single one replication dataset, each of the replication datasets that contains our code is retrieved from Harvard Dataverse on the AWS cloud. So on an instance that runs on the AWS cloud. Then it is automatically analyzed. So we collect data on the content, install used R libraries, and attempt automatic code re-execution. So as I said, we kind of mimic this behavior if someone just downloading the code files and then trying to rerun them out. Just yeah, and also install used R libraries. And then we get the result of this like code execution. So the re-execution result and other collected data are passed to a database for analysis. So then in this case on AWS, that is a Dynamo database. And then that is done for thousands of data sets that are available on Dataverse that contain our code. All right, so what did we learn? So first, these are kind of like the basic properties of the data set. So some first results. So we retrieved 2,109 publicly available replication data sets containing 9,078 R files. When we look into the metadata of these datasets, we can see that over 94 of the datasets belong to social sciences, which is maybe interesting to consider when we see other results. Also, typically, these datasets were not big, so just a few megabytes, but the number of files is 8 typically, and typically less than 15. So yeah, it is. We also plot all of this information, so that is in the paper. When it comes to some of the other information that we can see, that file names length is typically 10 to 20 characters, meaning that they are relatively descriptive. So in principle, if the file name has a longer title, that means that we understand what is inside of that. That's the assumption. Also, the documentation is present in 57% of the data sets. Documentation meaning a README file or code book file or something along those lines. And also we can see that typically research code is commented. So comments comprise 90%, 20% of the shared R code. So all of these things are kind of good, acceptable, is that we have long file names. Also, we have documentation in over 50% of the data sets. And also we have a lot of comments in the code, which would hopefully facilitate reuse. All right, because this study was done on R programming language, we're also interested to see what happens with the R files that are conventional files. So do we see any of the R conventional files? And when it comes to R conventional files, these are, for example, description that has a metadata description on the software that is developed. Also README files, license, namespace, Docker file would be maybe something more advanced. Also R Markdown is very often used. And then, for example, R project files, that means that the code is actually packaged in a project. And also install.r, that is a conventional file to pre-install some of the libraries used to execute other code. And so we then analyzed the software, so the datasets, to see if any of these files is present. And then we saw the following. So the answer is no. So for most of these files, actually, we don't see that they are present in the Dataverse datasets. However, README files are present in about 50% of the datasets, which is acceptable. Well, yeah, that there is some sort of documentation. So yeah, this is then out of 2,109 replication datasets. All right. So we definitely see that there is room for improvement, but then this also is kind of informative because we learn that the code files, research code files that are shared on Dataverse as a replication package are not typically R packages, which also makes sense. Just also kind of an interesting thing, we were looking into what are the most used libraries in research code. And these are naturally data visualization and plotting libraries, then data wrangling in display in a tabular form, data import and export, and statistical analysis. All right. So next, we want to see next we will see what is the kind of like the ratio, the success rate of re-executing this code. So what happens if we try to run an R script? What is the success rate? So the experiment, or the large-scale analysis, is conducted in the following way. So first, we re-execute the original code. So these are the 2,300 R files. And then out of these, only 843 were successfully re-executed without an error. But then for many of the others, we see library errors, working directory errors, file paths, inputs and outputs errors, and also missing objects. So, and then at this point, we conduct automatized code cleaning. So there is a script that analyzes these errors and conducts code cleaning, in a sense that it pre-installs libraries, it changes the working directory to the current working directory, tries to remove fixed paths and have relative paths instead. And yeah, also conducts other minor changes in the code. All right, so then at this point, after the code cleaning step, we try to re-execute the code once again. So what happens is that now we definitely see an improvement. So more code files are re-executed successfully, so over 1,000. However, we see that these initial errors are also masking other errors that we see in the code. So still we see a lot of library errors, file path, output errors, missing objects, and so on. So what we can learn from this is that, well, many code errors can be avoided by capturing library dependencies and testing code in a clean environment. Meaning that with this automatized code cleaning step, we succeeded to see a change in how these files were, how successful the re-execution was. Meaning that that is something that researchers themselves, before sharing the code, can also do. So also, of course, testing the code in a clean environment is very helpful to understand what are the missing files and what else need to be added to the replication package. What are also the other things that we've learned is that when we look for replication packages that belong to a journal, we can see that those ones are typically much better curated. So in particular, these are replication packages that belong to the journal collections. So journals with stricter data policies have higher rate of executable code. The journal average is a little bit higher than the total average of re-execution rates. And yes, in particular, we can see that that the best performing journals are also have some sort of like code review. So the study essentially shows that there is a positive correlation in between code review and code curation and data curation to the re-execution rate. All right. So that was the large-scale study on research code execution and quality. And then this is a summary of the study. So we can see that in the study, we saw that researchers typically do not use libraries for code testing, provenance, or workflows. We see that simple code cleaning, so automatized script, resulted in substantial improvement in re-execution. And also that code re-execution correlates with journals' data sharing policy strictness, meaning that stricter code had a stricter data sharing policy had also reflected in the better performance in code re-execution. All right, so what are the lessons learned, and what can researchers and what can research labs do based on these results? So what can researchers do? So when it comes to coding in R, there are some things that R language provides and that can be used directly from R. So for example, library versions should be captured by minimally the output of session info from the researcher's R session, or a description file that captures metadata, or install.r that would also be like a starting script to pre-install the libraries, or by using packages such as renv, R for environment, to track the libraries and their version number. Next thing is it is important to use relative file paths when sharing code, so that we can, so that there are no like system dependencies and system paths that showed in this study to cause a lot of errors. Next thing is also workflow automation, so using things like R Markdown and also packages like targets or Drake to automatize an analysis also that shows what is the sequence of how the code should be run. And this kind of automatization takes a little bit of time, but then also it can point to some errors that we may have in the code that we have not seen before. So it is also kind of like a troubleshooting exercise. Next, runtime environment capture and documentation. And by this, I mean by using some sort of like a more advanced ways to capture runtime environments, such as, for example, Docker. So there is a special type of Docker containers for our Docker universe, and that offers like a great base, like a starting step for creating good runtime environments that can be reusable and then create portable analysis. Next, what can research labs do? So we see that code review really helped with code re-execution and reuse. So one thing is to encourage a group code review in a way, encourage it within the group. That again takes time, but it is really helpful. And also it is really helpful when a person leaves and then other people need to reinterpret their code. Next thing is also to use reproducibility checklists or templates. So in particular, I really like checklists because it is a simple tool, right? It is a simple tool, yet very powerful to kind of like just understand what are the things we look for. And also kind of like there's this component that is satisfying to kind of like check off a box and then just understand that something is done well. Then also templates, that it can be like a template for how to create an analysis or how to create documentation for code. So a template can be really helpful. Here is an example of a really good checklist. And this is a checklist for code review at Journal of Open Source Software. So you can check it out here. And then, it has like a really nice list of things that are looked for when the software is reviewed. And of course, this serves double purpose. It serves also for the reviewer, but also for the author who knows that this will be reviewed. Next, what can research labs do? So another thing is that they can also hire a research software engineer. So research software engineers, that's a relatively new role in academia, which is a research software engineer specialist, an expert that can work with different groups and help them develop good software. And in my group, so I work in a group called National Studies on Air Pollution and Health and Public Health. We have a research software engineer who has done an amazing work developing our software. And there are several packages. So here you can see SAPH Software, so National Studies on Air Pollution and Health. So here are packages that Naeem, our research software engineer, developed. And also they are available on CRAN. There are papers associated with those packages. And because the group specializes in causal inference, all these packages are kind of like revolving around those statistical methods. And you can learn more about these at nshapsoftware.github.io. Right. And then next thing is that we want to have good guides for users and developers to also understand like what is the style for the software, how to contribute, what is going to be the review workflow. And we can also see that in my group. So here on this web page, there is also like a good information on how to contribute to the software. That is also what is maintained by our research software engineer, Naeem. And also we have guidelines on just the style, so how to make this software better. and how to make it also like readable, yeah, for everyone. So there are like standard guidelines. Okay, so that will conclude this talk. So in conclusion, we've seen from the large-scale study that I presented that it is hard to re-execute and use old research code. However, we can also see that curated replication datasets or curated code has higher re-execution rates. So there are some things that can be done. So recommendations for researchers is to learn best practices for coding and just use those, be mindful of those. Also to automatize code that can serve double purpose, first automatizing code, but then also troubleshooting. Capture runtime environment, either with packages or maybe external tools such as containers. And then recommendations for research labs. These are to encourage group code review, use checklists and templates, and also consider hiring a research software engineer, or if the group uses a lot of data, consider hiring research data engineer. So that's, yeah, these are the recommendations. Also, it is important to be mindful that all of these things may take like a time overhead, but then they should actually pay off quite a bit when there is like, yeah, it's a time saver in the long run. All right. So thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer questions if there are any questions.